Since time immemorial, the Catholic Church has been the guardian of documents, artifacts, and texts that have shaped Western civilization. But what if there was something hidden in its vaults that could rewrite the history of Jesus Christ? What if the real life of the man who changed the course of humanity was very different from the official version? These questions lead us to one of the most mysterious and inaccessible places in the world, the Vatican's secret archives. A place that, for many, holds secrets capable of shaking the foundations of Christianity. But what exactly could be hidden inside? Why are these documents kept so far from public view? And could there be hidden pages with information that could change everything we know about Jesus? The historical records of Christ's life, as they are known today, have been carefully organized and canonized over the centuries. But there are evident gaps that raise numerous suspicions. For instance, the New Testament is virtually silent about Jesus' early years, briefly mentioning his birth and then jumping directly to his adult life. What happened during this unknown period? Why were these details omitted? Many researchers believe that these lost years might be documented in secret records that have never been disclosed to the public. What if the Vatican held these answers but chose to keep them confidential? The Vatican Secret Archives, located in the depths of Vatican City, houses thousands of documents inaccessible to the vast majority of people. Although the Church asserts that these records serve only to preserve its vast history, there is evidence suggesting that some texts may contain compromising information. Historical accounts indicate that, over the centuries, various documents have been suppressed or even destroyed to maintain a singular narrative about Jesus. But why? What could be so impactful that it needs to be kept out of public knowledge? Many believe that among these documents there are records that speak about the real origin of Christ, his teachings that were not included in the Gospels, and even details about his life before his public ministry. For example, there is the theory that Jesus may have traveled to Egypt, India, or even Tibet, where he would have studied spiritual doctrines before returning to Israel. If this is true, then why has this part of the story never been told? Could it be because his original message was very different from what we were taught? Or because his influence could have extended far beyond what we imagine? One of the events that most influenced what we know today about Jesus was the Council of Nicaea, held in the 4th century by Emperor Constantine. This council not only defined which Gospels would be considered canonical, but also excluded many other texts that brought alternative perspectives on Christ. The so-called Apocryphal Gospels, such as those of Thomas, Judas, and Mary Magdalene, present a radically different view of Jesus and his role in history. But why were these texts rejected? Could they have contained information that might challenge the power structure of the Church? Another intriguing point is the relationship between the Vatican and the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the 1940s. These ancient documents, which date back to the period when Jesus lived, could contain crucial information about his historical context. However, after their discovery, these manuscripts were quickly removed from public access and spent decades under the control of a select group of scholars linked to the Church. The question many ask is, what exactly did they contain that made their study so restricted? And it doesn't stop there. Some researchers suggest that the Vatican holds in its vaults records written by contemporaries of Jesus, which could provide a much more accurate portrait of his life and teachings. However, the Church refuses to allow full access to these documents. The official argument is that this restriction is due to the need for preservation and security. But many question if the real reason isn't fear that certain information might come to light and challenge the authority and credibility of the Church. After all, history was written by the victors, and over the centuries, the Church had absolute power over which pieces of information should be disseminated and which should be forgotten. This leads us to the following question. To what extent is the version we know today about Jesus Christ the complete truth? Or could there be hidden fragments of history waiting to be revealed? Whatever the answer may be, one thing is certain. the mystery of the Vatican continues to fascinate and intrigue generations. And as new archaeological and documentary discoveries are made, the possibility that something is hidden becomes even more plausible. But will these secrets ever come to light? And if they do, how would that change the world as we know it? The first piece of this puzzle is in place. Now, we must follow the clues that will take us deeper into this mystery. And the next question leads us to an even more intriguing territory: the Apocryphal Gospels and the lost manuscripts. What do they really say about Jesus? If the story of Jesus has been carefully shaped over the centuries, what happened to the accounts that did not fit into the official version? What was silenced, erased, or lost over time? The answer may lie in the so-called Apocryphal Gospels, ancient texts that offer alternative versions of the life and teachings of Christ. But why were these documents excluded from the Bible? Who decided what should be accepted and what should be forgotten? And, most importantly, what do these texts reveal about Jesus that the Church preferred to hide? The Gospels that make up the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were chosen after centuries of theological and political disputes. However, there are many other writings that were considered heretical and banned by the Church. One of the most well-known is the Gospel of Thomas, a text that contains supposed secret words of Jesus and emphasizes the pursuit of self-knowledge and spiritual enlightenment, something very close to Eastern mystical traditions. If this gospel were widely accepted, the message of Christianity could be very different from what we know today. Another intriguing document is the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which suggests that she had a much more significant role in Jesus' circle than Christian tradition admits. According to this gospel, Mary Magdalene was not just a follower, but someone who understood Jesus' teachings on a deeper level than the apostles themselves. This revelation would challenge centuries of patriarchal narrative within the Church. After all, why was the figure of Mary Magdalene so marginalized? Could she have been Christ's true favorite disciple? In addition to these, there is the Gospel of Judas, a text that presents a completely different view of Judas Iscariot's betrayal. According to this document, Judas would not have been a traitor, but rather someone who followed a request from Jesus himself to help him fulfill his destiny. This perspective drastically alters the traditional understanding of Judas's role in the crucifixion. If accepted, it could change the entire doctrine on sin, redemption, and the need for a divine sacrifice. But these apocryphal gospels are not the only pieces of this puzzle. One of the most important discoveries of the 20th century were the Dead Sea Scrolls, found between 1946 and 1956 in caves near the Dead Sea. These documents, which date back more than 2,000 years, were written by a Jewish sect known as the Essenes. Some scholars believe that Jesus might have had contact with this group, whose beliefs were surprisingly similar to his own. The discovery of these manuscripts brought to light a different view of the religious context of Christ's time, raising questions about the extent to which his message was influenced by pre-existing traditions. Another crucial finding was the Nag Hammadi Library, a collection of Gnostic texts discovered in Egypt in 1945. These documents reveal a strand of early Christianity very different from the official doctrine. Instead of a religion based on blind faith and obedience, the Gnostics preached a spiritual path based on inner knowledge, the pursuit of personal enlightenment, and the rejection of religious institutions that controlled the truth. These ideas were a direct threat to the emerging church, which depended on centralized authority to maintain its power. The big question is, if these texts are as old as the canonical Gospels, why were they rejected? The answer lies in politics and power. During the early centuries of Christianity, different groups competed to define what would be the official doctrine. And it was at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD that Emperor Constantine and the church leaders decided which texts would be part of the Bible. Any gospel that did not align with the church's view was declared heretical and persecuted. But was this decision based solely on truth, or was there an effort to consolidate the church's authority and eliminate alternative interpretations of Jesus? Another detail that makes this story even more intriguing is the fact that many of these banned texts have recently been rediscovered, but still face resistance to be widely accepted. Why does the Church still hesitate to recognize the validity of these documents? The Vatican has never officially supported the dissemination of these apocryphal Gospels, and most of the faithful are not even aware of their existence. If the truth is within our reach, why is it still so hard to access it? The issue of the lost manuscripts leads us to a deeper reflection. Is the Jesus we know today the same historical Jesus? Or was his image shaped to meet the political and religious interests of an institution that needed a divine, unquestionable, and infallible leader? The possibility that the Church may have rewritten history is an idea that challenges everything we have learned throughout our lives. If what the Apocryphal Gospels and ancient manuscripts suggest is true, then the story of Jesus is much more complex than we think. He may have been a spiritual leader who taught self-knowledge and personal enlightenment, closer to an Eastern sage than a Messiah as described by the Church. He may have shared secret teachings with his disciples, instructing them to seek divinity within themselves, rather than relying on a religious institution to achieve it. But if this view were accepted, what would happen to the Church? The answer is simple. It would lose its monopoly on faith. Therefore, over the centuries, there has been a constant effort to suppress any idea that challenged the official narrative. However, with new discoveries and increasing access to information, more and more people are beginning to question the story they were told. If there are documents that can reveal a different version of Jesus' life, they are probably kept under lock and key. And this is where we return to the Vatican. What else could be hidden in their secret archives? Are there even more compromising records about Jesus' youth and his true mission? The Vatican's silence on these manuscripts is deafening. And this leads us to the next big mystery. What has the Vatican never wanted to reveal about Jesus' youth? What happened to him in the years that the Bible mentions nothing? Few moments in history are as mysterious as the so-called lost years of Jesus. The Bible mentions his birth, an isolated incident from his childhood at 12 years old, and then jumps directly to his adult life when he begins his ministry. What happened during those years? How did a simple boy from Nazareth become the man whose message impacted millions of lives? And why has the Church always avoided answering this question clearly? If there are records of this period, where are they? And, most importantly, why have they not been shared with the world? The absence of information about Jesus' youth has always generated numerous theories. Some scholars believe that he simply lived an ordinary life until the beginning of his mission, working as a carpenter alongside Joseph. However, there are indications that his journey may have been much more extensive than we imagine. Ancient records suggest that Jesus may have traveled to Egypt, India, and even Tibet in search of spiritual knowledge. These pieces of evidence, however, have been largely ignored by the Church. But why? In the 19th century, a Russian explorer named Nikolai Notovich claimed to have found a Buddhist manuscript in the Hemis monastery in Tibet. This text recounted the story of a man named Isa, a wise man from the West who studied with Buddhist and Hindu monks before returning to his homeland. The resemblance between this Isa and Jesus is striking. Could it be possible that Christ himself spent years learning from the spiritual masters of the East? If this is true, why was this detail omitted from Christian tradition? Furthermore, there are historical indications that Jesus spent some time in Egypt. During his childhood, his parents fled there to escape the persecution of Herod. But did he return in his youth to seek knowledge? Egypt was a major center of spiritual wisdom, home to ancient mysteries and esoteric teachings. If Jesus truly spent years studying there, it's possible that he absorbed mystical concepts that influenced his words and actions later on. This theory strengthens when we analyze certain teachings of Jesus that closely resemble Eastern doctrines. His emphasis on love, material detachment, compassion, and inner search are elements strongly present in Buddhism and Hinduism. Could his message have been inspired by these traditions? If this is true, the Church would have many reasons to hide this information, as it would weaken the idea that he was exclusively a product of Jewish tradition. Another important detail is the relationship of Jesus with the Essenes, a Jewish sect that lived in isolation and practiced rigorous spirituality. Many historians believe that Jesus may have had direct contact with this group and absorbed their teachings. The Essenes valued purity, meditation, and a direct connection with the divine without the need for religious intermediaries, an idea that Jesus seems to have carried forward in his own ministry. But if all of this is true, where are the records that prove this journey? The answer might be within the Vatican's secret archives. Historical documents, apocryphal manuscripts, and archaeological evidence may have been collected over the centuries and hidden from humanity. The reason? If the truth about Jesus' youth were to surface, the Church would have to admit that its original message has been shaped and edited over time. Another intriguing aspect that the Church has never fully explained is the radical transformation of Jesus from his childhood to his adult life. How did he go from being an unknown youngster to a spiritual master with such profound teachings? If he truly traveled and studied with masters from other traditions, this would imply that his message was universal, something that would challenge the idea that Christianity is a unique and exclusive doctrine. And so the question arises, could this be the reason why the Church made such an effort to exclude any information about these lost years? The Bible itself suggests that Jesus might have had a broader knowledge than the Jewish tradition of his time allowed. When he spoke in parables, he used concepts that recall Eastern teachings about enlightenment and spiritual awakening. When he said that the kingdom of God is within us, his words echoed Hindu and Buddhist philosophies about the divine that dwells within each one. If the canonical Gospels ignore Jesus' youth, where could we find clues about this period? Gnostic texts like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip contain fragments suggesting that Christ had access to a deeper understanding of the nature of existence. But these texts were declared heretical and banned by the Church. Why? Could they contain information that could change the way we see Jesus? If the Vatican has documents that confirm these stories, why haven't they been revealed to the public? Could the truth destabilize the pillars of modern Christian faith? After all, if Jesus spent years studying Eastern spiritual teachings, it would mean that his message was influenced by religions that existed centuries before Christianity. This would shatter the narrative that he was the sole bearer of absolute truth. The story of Jesus' youth is a missing piece in this puzzle. But if one day this truth comes to light, will we be prepared to accept a Christ who was much more than a Jewish preacher? And what if his mission had been much larger than the version that was told to us? With all these hidden evidences, a new, even more intriguing question arises. How did the Council of Nicaea manipulate the sacred texts and shape the official version of Christianity? What information was erased to create the religion we know today? Christianity as we know it today did not arise naturally or spontaneously. It was shaped, edited, and in many ways, manipulated to serve the political and religious interests of a time when power was intrinsically linked to faith. And one of the most decisive moments of this transformation occurred in the year 325 AD during the Council of Nicaea, convened by Emperor Constantine. But what really happened at this council? And, most importantly, what information about Jesus and his message was altered or erased forever? Before the Council of Nicaea, Christianity was a fragmented religion, composed of various currents and interpretations about Jesus. There were groups that saw him as a prophet, others who believed he was a divine being, and even those who advocated a more mystical and philosophical view of his teachings. The lack of consensus made the Christian faith appear disorganized and even chaotic. For Constantine, an emperor who wanted to consolidate his power over the Roman Empire, this disunity was a problem. He needed a single, structured, and coherent religion that could be used as a tool for social and political control. And that's exactly what he achieved by summoning the bishops of the time to define, once and for all, the official Christian doctrine. At the Council of Nicaea, the church leaders made pivotal decisions that would forever change the course of Christianity. The central point of the discussions was the divinity of Jesus. Until then, many Christians believed that Jesus was a great spiritual teacher, but not necessarily equal to God. However, for the church to have a solid foundation, it was essential to establish his figure as divine. It was at this point that the doctrine of the Trinity was formalized, decreeing that Jesus was of the same substance as God the Father. This decision was not based solely on theology, but also on a strategic necessity to consolidate the church's authority over the faithful. But that wasn't the only change. At the Council of Nicaea, it was also decided to exclude various texts that until then were read and respected by different Christian communities. The Apocryphal Gospels, such as those of Thomas, Mary Magdalene, and Judas, were banned as they presented interpretations of Jesus that did not fit with the official doctrine. Some of these texts emphasized the pursuit of self-knowledge and the idea that each individual could find God within themselves without the need for religious intermediaries. If these Gospels had been kept, the hierarchical structure of the church would have been threatened, as people would not depend on priests to connect with the divine. Another alarming detail from the Council of Nicaea was the creation of a politically convenient Christianity. In order for the new religion to be accepted by the Roman Empire, elements of pagan beliefs were discreetly incorporated into Christian doctrine. Many important dates were adapted, such as Christmas, which was set on December 25th, the same date as the celebration of the pagan god Mithras. Symbols and rituals from previous cults were absorbed to make Christianity more accessible to the masses. But this raises an important question. To what extent was the Christian faith shaped to meet the interests of Rome, and to what extent did it remain faithful to the original message of Jesus? The Council of Nicaea also had another devastating effect. It initiated the persecution of Christians who did not follow the official doctrine. Groups that had different interpretations of faith were labeled as heretics and began to be persecuted. The so-called Gnostics, who saw Jesus as a master of spiritual knowledge and not as a divine being, were especially attacked. Their writings were destroyed and their followers were silenced. But could it be that among these burned documents there were truths that could change everything we know about Christ? And there is something even more concerning. We know that Constantine did not convert to Christianity immediately. In fact, he continued to worship pagan deities for most of his life. Only on his deathbed did he receive Christian baptism. So why would a pagan emperor have such a keen interest in defining the course of Christianity? The answer might lie in power. By making Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, he ensured that he could use it as a tool of control over his subjects. And for this, it was necessary to create a unified version of the faith, eliminating any doctrine that promoted people's spiritual autonomy. If all of this is true, then the Council of Nicaea was not just a religious event, but a political intervention in the history of Christianity. But what does this mean for the history of Jesus? Could the version passed down to us over the centuries actually be the closest to the truth? Or has part of his true message been erased forever? And this leads us to an even more intriguing question. If the Church and the Roman Empire manipulated the sacred texts to create an official doctrine, what else might be hidden in the Vatican's secret archives? Are there forbidden records that reveal a completely different version of the story of Jesus? This is the question that leads us to the next big mystery. What is in the Vatican Secret Library? Could there be forbidden documents about the life of Jesus still locked away, hidden from the world's eyes? Hidden beneath the corridors of Vatican City, there is one of the most inaccessible collections of documents in the world, the Vatican's Secret Library. This mysterious place houses thousands of historical records, rare manuscripts, and documents that, according to theorists and historians, may contain secrets capable of rewriting the history of Christianity. But what exactly is stored there? And why does the Church keep these archives away from the public? Are they merely administrative records, or is there something much deeper and more compromising hidden in the shadows? The Vatican Secret Library is not just a simple archive. It contains documents accumulated over centuries, many of which have never been disclosed to the world. Only a small elite of researchers, after a rigorous approval process, are granted permission to access some of these records. But even these scholars face severe restrictions and cannot simply leaf through any document. The official justification is that the Vatican wishes to preserve these writings from deterioration. But many believe that the real reason is something else: to prevent certain information from coming to light. The biggest mystery surrounding the Vatican Library is related to documents that may contain unpublished information about the life of Jesus Christ. What could be in these records that would make their disclosure impossible? Some theories point to the existence of suppressed manuscripts, texts that could present a different version of Jesus' story, perhaps more aligned with the Apocryphal Gospels than with the canonical Gospels. If these texts truly exist, they could reveal details about Christ's lost years, his relationship with Mary Magdalene, and even the true nature of his teachings. Among the documents kept confidential, it is believed that there are records written by contemporaries of Jesus, letters from Romans who witnessed his crucifixion, and even texts detailing secret meetings between early Christian leaders who debated how to shape the doctrine. In addition, there are rumors that documents from the Council of Nicaea, containing discussions that led to the exclusion of various biblical texts, may be stored there. If these transcripts exist, they could confirm that the Church deliberately manipulated the original message of Christ. Another point that piques curiosity is the possible presence of original texts from the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Library, which we have previously mentioned. These documents, discovered in the 20th century, brought a new perspective on early Christianity, revealing that there were many versions of Jesus' teachings before the standardization imposed by the Church. The fact that some of these texts are kept in the Vatican suggests that the institution wants to maintain control over which information can or cannot be freely studied. But the mystery of the Vatican's secret library is not limited to the story of Jesus alone. There are records about the Crusades, the trials of the Inquisition, and even correspondence between popes and monarchs that could reveal hidden agreements that changed the course of history. In addition, some believe there are scientific documents that were deliberately hidden to prevent certain discoveries from challenging the Church's doctrines. And here arises the most intriguing question of all. What would happen if all the Vatican's secret documents were revealed to the world? Would the Church lose credibility? Would people's faith be shaken? Or would the story of Jesus become even richer and more complex than we imagined? The fact is that over the centuries, the Church has always adopted a stance of control over the Christian narrative, deciding what should be taught and what should be forgotten. But one thing is certain: if the Vatican keeps hidden information about Jesus, it's because it could drastically change the way we understand his life and mission. The Church's silence on these documents only heightens the mystery. After all, why hide something that could strengthen people's faith? The answer may lie in the fear that certain truths could be revealed, truths that could challenge the structure and authority of the Vatican. And this leads us to a new question. What are the omitted truths about the origins of Christianity? How has this religion been shaped over the centuries to become what we know today? This is the next big mystery we're going to explore. Is the Christianity we know the same as what was taught by Jesus, or has something been lost along the way? Christianity as we know it today is the result of centuries of transformations, theological disputes, and political manipulations. But is the version that has reached us faithful to the original teachings of Jesus? Or has something been omitted, altered, and rewritten over time to serve specific interests? To answer this question, we need to go back to the origins of Christianity, a period of intense diversity of thought, where Christ's message was interpreted in various ways. In the first centuries after the death of Jesus, Christianity was not a single, standardized religion. There were numerous branches, each with its own view on who Jesus was and what his real mission was. Some communities saw him as an enlightened prophet, others considered him a spiritual master who taught self-knowledge, and there were those who argued that he was a divine being, part of a heavenly trinity. This multiplicity of beliefs was gradually eliminated as a single narrative began to be imposed by the Church. One of the greatest examples of this diversity is the Gnostic movement, which flourished in the early centuries of Christianity. The Gnostics believed that Jesus came to teach the way of inner knowledge, and that salvation did not depend on religious rituals or intermediaries, but rather on the discovery of divinity within each individual. For the Gnostics, the institutionalized church was unnecessary, as each person could connect directly with God. This view was a direct threat to the power of the emerging church, which quickly began to label the Gnostics as heretics and destroy their texts. The Nag Hammadi library, discovered in 1945, revealed many of these Gnostic texts that had been suppressed. Among them, we find the Gospel of Thomas, one of the most controversial documents ever found. Unlike the canonical Gospels, this text does not focus on the death and resurrection of Jesus, but rather on his spiritual teachings. One of its most impactful passages states, "If we know ourselves, then we will be known, and we will understand that we are children of the living Father." This sentence suggests that Jesus taught a spirituality based on self-knowledge, something very different from the idea that salvation can only be achieved through the Church. Another intriguing point is the possible influence of other religious traditions on early Christianity. As we mentioned earlier, there are indications that Jesus may have traveled to the East and absorbed elements of Buddhism and Hinduism. This would explain the similarity between some of his words and the teachings of these traditions. However, any suggestion that Christ's message could have been inspired by other philosophies was systematically erased by the Church, which wanted to consolidate Christianity as a unique and independent doctrine. But it was not only spiritual knowledge that was suppressed. Over the centuries, the Church also rewrote the history of crucial figures in early Christianity. One of the most emblematic cases is that of Mary Magdalene. Instead of being recognized as a close disciple of Jesus, she was transformed into a repentant sinner, a narrative without any basis in the original biblical texts. This distortion served to diminish her importance and reinforce the idea of a Christianity dominated by male figures. Furthermore, there are theories suggesting that Jesus might have had a family, something that would directly challenge the Church's doctrine. The Gospel of Philip, another Gnostic text, suggests a close relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, mentioning that he often kissed her and that she was his companion. If this is true, it would mean that the image of a celibate Christ was a later construction to align his figure with the Church's ideals. Another important aspect that was overlooked relates to the relationship between Christianity and paganism. During the first centuries, the Church absorbed various elements from pagan cults to facilitate the conversion of new believers. The date of Christmas, for example, was chosen to coincide with the winter solstice festivities, which celebrated the birth of the god Mithra. The concept of a virgin giving birth to a divine savior existed in various cultures before Christianity. This means that many of the aspects we now consider Christian may have been adaptations from much older traditions. The manipulation of Christianity's history became even more evident during the Middle Ages, when the Catholic Church consolidated its power. The Inquisition, for example, pursued anyone who questioned the official version of the faith. Books were burned, documents were destroyed, and those who dared to challenge the Church were brutally punished. This period sealed the fate of many pieces of information that could have shed new light on the true origins of Christianity. But if there have been so many changes and adaptations throughout history, the inevitable question is, why did the Church need to hide these truths? The answer may lie in the need to maintain control over the faithful. A Christianity based on personal knowledge and inner search would weaken the Church's hierarchical structure, as each individual could connect with the divine without the need for priests, rituals, or rigid dogmas. If we knew the whole truth about the origins of Christianity, it could completely change the way we understand faith. And this leads us to a new mystery. How has the Church continued to censor knowledge over the centuries? How many books, manuscripts, and ideas have been erased to ensure the maintenance of religious power? This is the question that leads us to the next part: the Church and the censorship of knowledge over the centuries. Since its rise to power, the Catholic Church has exercised strict control over knowledge. For centuries, information that could challenge its authority was censored, burned, and prohibited. But what exactly was hidden? And why did the institution strive so much to prevent certain documents and ideas from becoming accessible to the public? History shows us that whenever knowledge threatened established power, it was suppressed. But was the truth about the life of Jesus among this forbidden knowledge? The Church's censorship began in the early centuries of Christianity, when various Gospels were banned for not aligning with the official doctrine. But this practice intensified during the Middle Ages, a period when the Vatican held an absolute monopoly on knowledge. It was during this time that the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, or Index of Prohibited Books, arose, a list of works that the faithful were forbidden to read. This index included not only religious texts, but also scientific and philosophical works that challenged the worldview imposed by the Church. Among the censored books were the writings of thinkers such as Galileo Galilei, Copernicus, and Giordano Bruno. Galileo, for example, was condemned by the Inquisition simply for defending the idea that the Earth revolved around the Sun, a concept that went against the geocentric view promoted by the Church. Giordano Bruno, who explored the idea of an infinite universe with multiple inhabited worlds, was burned alive in a public square. His crime? Having ideas that contradicted religious authority. But censorship was not limited to science. For centuries, the Church pursued ancient manuscripts that presented alternative versions of the Christian faith. Many of these documents were destroyed, while others were carefully stored in inaccessible places, such as the Vatican Secret Library. This practice ensured that only the official version of Christianity was taught, while any divergent view was suppressed. Another striking episode of religious censorship was the Inquisition, one of the darkest periods in Western history. Created to persecute heretics and dissidents, the Inquisition used brutal methods to silence anyone who dared to question the dogmas of the Church. During this time, countless people were tortured and killed simply for possessing ideas that challenged the dominant thinking. But the greatest victim of this period was not just the individuals, it was knowledge itself. Many texts that could reveal hidden truths about the origin of Christianity were forever destroyed. Entire libraries were burned, and ancient manuscripts disappeared without a trace. One of the most tragic examples was the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, which contained a vast collection of writings from antiquity. Although the Church's direct responsibility in this event is still debated, there is no doubt that the religious authorities of the time saw knowledge as a threat to their dominion. And censorship didn't stop in the Middle Ages. During the Protestant Reformation, the Church attempted to prevent the translation of the Bible into other languages. Until then, the sacred text could only be read in Latin, a language accessible only to the clergy and intellectual elites. When reformers like Martin Luther and William Tyndale began translating the scriptures into the people's language, they were immediately persecuted. The reason? The Church feared that by reading the Bible for themselves, the faithful would notice the contradictions and manipulations present in the sacred texts. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of religious censorship is the possibility that certain documents about Jesus Christ may have been deliberately hidden. As we mentioned earlier, the Vatican Secret Library may contain forbidden records about the life and teachings of Christ. If this information were to come to light, it could shake the foundations of institutionalized Christianity. Another indication that something is being hidden is the fact that, to this day, the Catholic Church resists fully opening its archives to the public. Despite allowing limited access to some researchers, many documents remain restricted, without any convincing explanation. This raises an inevitable question. If there is nothing to hide, why does the Vatican maintain so many barriers to knowledge? If history teaches us anything, it's that power and knowledge have always walked hand in hand, and those who wish to maintain control often do everything they can to prevent certain truths from being revealed. But what would happen if this information finally came to light? Would we be prepared to face a different story of Jesus than the one we were taught? And this leads us to an even deeper mystery. What if Jesus had descendants? Is there a secret lineage that the Church has tried to hide over the centuries? This is the question we will explore next. The secret of Jesus' lineage, the forbidden truth. If there is a secret that could shake the foundations of Christianity as we know it, that secret would be related to the possibility that Jesus may have left descendants. This idea directly challenges the official doctrine of the Church, which has always presented Jesus as a divine being, without romantic involvement or children. But what if this story had been carefully shaped to hide the truth? And if Jesus not only had a companion, but also a secret lineage that was erased from history? This theory is not new. For centuries, various clues have emerged in apocryphal texts, historical documents, and even in Renaissance art, suggesting that Mary Magdalene was not just a follower of Jesus, but his wife or closest companion. The Gospel of Philip, one of the Gnostic texts found in Nag Hammadi, explicitly mentions that Mary Magdalene was Jesus' companion and that he often kissed her. This detail alone would be controversial, but the word used in the original manuscript for companion was the same one used at the time to refer to wives. If this is true, then the Church suppressed this information to uphold the idea of a celibate Jesus, distant from common human relationships. But why? The answer may lie in the fear that a lineage of Jesus would threaten the Church's power structure. If there were direct descendants of Christ, they would have a legitimate claim to the spiritual leadership of Christianity, which could challenge papal authority and the entire ecclesiastical hierarchy. The theory of Jesus' lineage gained even more strength with the emergence of historical documents suggesting that Mary Magdalene may have fled to the south of France after the crucifixion. According to local legends, she would have landed in the Provence region, where she lived until the end of her days. Some French traditions speak of a group of Christians who preserved a sacred secret over the centuries, a secret that involved a royal lineage descended from Jesus. This mystery has been explored in various works over the years, one of the most well-known being the book The Holy Grail and the Sacred Lineage by Michael Begant, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln. According to this theory, the concept of the Holy Grail would not refer to a physical chalice, but rather to the lineage of Jesus itself, a royal bloodline, which would have been kept secret over the centuries. And where would this lineage be today? According to some research, certain aristocratic groups in Europe, especially the Merovingians, the first royal dynasty of France, may be linked to this alleged descent from Jesus. Some genealogies suggest that this lineage would have been protected by secret societies, such as the Cathars and the Templars, and that over the centuries, this information was carefully concealed to avoid conflicts with the Church. But are there concrete evidences of this theory? The problem is that a large portion of the documents that could prove this story have been destroyed or are under the control of the Vatican. The Templars, for example, were persecuted and exterminated in the 14th century, accused of heresy, but many believe that their true crime was possessing forbidden knowledge about Christ's lineage. When the King of France, Philip IV, ordered the destruction of the Templars, there are reports that secret documents mysteriously disappeared. Furthermore, Renaissance art may hold clues about this mystery. Leonardo da Vinci, for example, is often cited as someone who knew this secret and subtly incorporated it into his works. His most famous painting, The Last Supper, shows a figure next to Jesus that many believe to be Mary Magdalene, not the Apostle John. the positioning of the figures, the absence of a chalice on the table, and the way Jesus and Magdalene's hands seemed to create the letter M raised suspicions that Da Vinci was trying to convey a coded message. But if this lineage really existed, why has it never been recognized? The answer may lie in the fear of the collapse of the traditional Christian structure. If it were proven that Jesus had children, the entire narrative built around his divine and celibate figure would be questioned. This would mean that the Church is not the only holder of the truth, and that there is a much more complex story behind the Christian faith. Another intriguing question is, what if this lineage still exists today? Some European aristocratic families still maintain genealogical records that suggest this possibility, but any study on this subject meets resistance. The descendants of Jesus could be among us, living discreetly, without the world knowing their true origin. If this theory proves to be true, then the Vatican's greatest secret is not just about Jesus' life, but about its continuity through his lineage. This means that the story of Christ did not end with his crucifixion. It may have continued through the blood of his descendants. But if there are so many secrets hidden throughout the centuries, the final question arises. What would happen if all these truths were revealed? How would this change the Christian faith and humanity itself? Would the Vatican be prepared to open its archives and admit what really happened? This is the theme of our last part. What would happen if the truth came to light? The truth, when revealed, can liberate, but it can also destroy. Over the centuries, Christianity has been built upon a narrative carefully crafted and guarded by the Church. But what if everything that was kept secret finally came to light? How would the faithful react upon discovering that the story of Jesus might be very different from what they were told? What would happen to the power structure of the Vatican and to Christianity itself? And above all, would we be prepared to face this truth? If hidden documents were revealed and proved that Jesus had an unknown youth, studied in distant lands, and perhaps had a lineage, the first consequence would be a theological earthquake. The central belief in the divine and celibate Jesus, the only bridge between humanity and God, would collapse. The Church would have to deal with an existential dilemma: admit that its narrative has been shaped over the centuries, or continue to deny the evidence and risk an unprecedented crisis of faith. The impact on the faithful would be profound. Millions of people who base their lives on the image of an idealized Jesus might feel betrayed. Some would lose their faith, while others would find a new meaning in the real story of Jesus, a man who perhaps was more human than the Church has always wanted to admit. However, there is an even more delicate issue. If the Church has hidden the truth about Jesus, what else could it be hiding? The Vatican would be forced to answer questions it has avoided for centuries. Why were documents concealed? Why were the Apocryphal Gospels banned? What is in the secret archives? The pressure from the academic community and society could force the Church to open its doors and reveal what it has always kept secret. And if that happened, we would witness one of the greatest scandals in the history of mankind. Beyond religion, the revelations could also shake up political and social structures. The Vatican, being one of the most influential institutions in the world, could lose a significant portion of its power and authority. After all, if its foundation was built on omissions and manipulations, what credibility would remain? Governments that have maintained ties with the Church for centuries would need to reconsider their alliances, and even other religions could be impacted, as many share common elements with the story of Christ. What if the lineage of Jesus truly existed and was identified? If there were direct descendants living today, how would the world react? Would they be recognized as legitimate heirs of the Christian faith, or would they be persecuted, as has happened with so many historical figures who threatened the status quo? This possibility raises a new dilemma. Would the Church attempt to protect this lineage, or eliminate it to prevent its authority from being questioned? The cultural impact would also be immense. Movies, books, and works of art would need to be reinterpreted in a new light. Even the Bible, the most influential book in history, could undergo deep revisions and profound questioning. What if the real message of Jesus was different from what we know? What if he taught a path of self-awareness and individual spirituality, instead of the need for an intermediary institution between man and God? If the Vatican one day were forced to release all its secret documents, we could be facing the biggest spiritual revolution in history. Some people might find a new faith, based on the bare and raw truth, while others might completely reject institutional Christianity. One way or another, nothing would remain as before. But the big question is, will this truth ever be revealed? The Vatican, with its millennia-old structure, will do everything to keep its secrets protected. But history shows us that no truth can be hidden forever. The discovery of ancient manuscripts, advances in archaeology, and humanity's own desire for answers will continue to challenge the barriers imposed by the Church. Perhaps the question we should be asking is not whether this truth will be revealed, but whether we are prepared to accept it. Are we ready to face a more human Jesus? Are we ready to admit that history may have been manipulated to serve political interests? Or do we prefer to remain in the safety of the traditional narrative, even knowing that it might not be the whole truth? The answer lies with each one of us. Knowledge liberates, but it also requires courage to face its consequences. And while secrets remain locked within the vaults of the Vatican, doubt persists. Is the greatest revelation in human history yet to come? Mind Unfettered, now I want to know your opinion. If all this information were to come to light, how do you think the world would react? What would happen to the Church, to people's faith, and to our understanding of the history of Jesus? Comment below your view on this mystery and share your perception with the community. Together, we can manifest a new perspective on the truth. And if you want to keep unraveling the hidden mysteries of Christ's story, don't stop here. The next video is already on your screen now. The Secret Disciples of Christ, Unveiling Hidden Knowledge. In it, we will explore Jesus' secret disciples and the hidden teachings that have been lost over the centuries. Click now and come discover what has not yet been revealed. See you there.